Hi listeners, Jason here. We are excited to finally announce registrations for the biggest Psych Health and Safety community event ever. The inaugural Psych Health and Safety Conference will be held at the Sofitel Wentworth, Sydney, June 19 to 20, 2024 and offer concurrent virtual attendance. It'll feature live podcast recordings with OG researchers including Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter of Burnout fame, Psych Health and Safety USA podcast host I. David Daniels, Australian super experts including the likes of David Burrows, a special 10-year anniversary integrated approaches to workplace mental health panel with authors Tony LaMontagne, Angela Martin and Kat Page, hand-picked case studies from organisations doing it well, and a very special interview with plaintiff Zaggy Kozarov by Catherine Dunlop on that High Court case which we previously covered on the podcast. This event will sell out. Get in quick to secure tickets at early bird prices for the 2-day conference, pre-conference masterclasses and the VIP dinner. The first 200 in-person registrations also get a copy of her latest book, The Burnout Challenge, signed by Christina Maslach herself. Find out more and register at www.psychhealthandsafetyconference.com. Now, on to this episode.
The overall development and success of members of any organization require an environment that provides psychological health and safety as an essential element for both the individual and the organization to thrive. We'll talk with a human resource professional about what it takes to create individual and organizational success. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, while also advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So a culture of psychological health and safety can create an environment that encourages people to share their ideas and their feedback without fear of judgment. This can lead to collaboration, creativity, growth, authentic communication, constructive feedback, and learning from mistakes. Conversely, a culture where people are discouraged from sharing their ideas or are fearful of judgment or other potential negative consequences of being themselves make it difficult for them to experience success. This is perhaps this situation is perhaps no more evident in an organization when we're addressing the human resource needs of the members of that organization. It's interesting how there are folks in the human resource environment that are still basically kind of personnel people from back in the day who see themselves more as kind of clerks and folks who are processing numbers. And then we're starting to find a generation of folks who understand that human resources is really about the human part of it. It's not just about the numbers. It's not just about tracking this or that, but it's about creating an environment where the humans in that environment feel safe and are safe. So it's my pleasure today to have a guest. I to be honest, I was telling him that before we started to record, I've been watching him through social media, watching his posts and watching the information he shares. And this is actually the first time that we're meeting. So, and I do this often a lot to really just get the chance to meet people. So the expressions that you see from me, they're real because I don't really know what's going to be said all the time. So let's get this conversation started with an introduction of my guest by my guest with this question. Who is Brandon Springle?
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm a husband. I'm a father. Now, I put that first. Have my wife and my 4 children, and so that's where to me, psychological health and safety starts in the household, right? From that social environment. I've been in the HR profession since around 2009. And so been active in multiple industries and gradually increasing responsibility. And so that has been a powerful experience and what I would deem a calling, really. I don't think human resources is really a profession more than it is a calling for those that are able to evolve and acclimate to the environment and the conditions, especially in this climate and in this time.
Okay. Uh, there's a second question I asked that's rather patented, I guess. Um, to really get your thoughts, what does psychological health and safety mean to you?
That's a great question. So psychological health and safety is a little bit newer to me, but I always kind of understood it. So I pursued psychological safety as a construct first, and I did a lot of research just on psychological safety and what does that actually mean and how can you actually create that. Psychological health and safety to me is more specific. It's easier to operationalize and talk about it because it's really about creating the conditions, working closely with the population that will be most largely affected by the psychosocial hazards and really understanding what truly is your risk in a culture or in an environment as it relates to somebody's psychological safety or their social understanding of the environment.
Yeah, yeah. I find often when I get into conversations with folks who have an understanding of psychological safety, that the Edmondson concept around people being able to express themselves without fear of retribution from the group and all that type of thing, that it is sometimes difficult to make the connection. And it appears that you've made it, that psychological safety without attention to the psychosocial hazards you're exposing people to won't get you very far, because you can kind of stumble into a situation that feels psychologically safe, but how do you keep it there as the person and the organization and the environment start to change? Because they will. Things happen. Folks, all kinds of things happen in people's lives. So good. We're in for a fun ride. So what sparked your interest in human resource management in general? What causes someone to, and I have to say this. So when I when I when I got my HR degree, my master's degree, I heard it described as a pink degree that not a whole lot of men go after, to be quite honest. And that's the other reason why I really wanted to find out, because human resources tends to be, there are a lot of women involved and not a lot of men, for all kinds of reasons. I don't know that I understand why. So why did you get interested?
That's a great question. So if I go back in time, and my father would say, and he tells me this often, is that when I was about 8 years old, I always said, I want to develop people. I want to develop talent. So as I was growing older, the type of talent that I thought I would develop would be more in the sports arena. So I was very much into basketball and looking at team morale and creating the right conditions and even doing little things on my video games I used to play. So I actually majored in sport and entertainment management. But in my undergrad career, I took one HR course and it ended up sticking with me. So as I started to work for a major college and university working with the athletic programs, I started to see what it looked like to create an experience in that if I take my talents and I take them to a place where I have a great deal of influence and stability, right? Because the sports arena is not always stable. I remember a specific season, I think it was the Atlanta Falcons. They had a losing year. They cleared out their whole front office. And so I said, you know what? Maybe sports and entertainment, maybe that's not the road for me. So I went back to school and I pursued a master's degree in HR management. And because of my background, my focus being on the experience, then the conditions I already understood. Because, for example, I did a paper when I was in school on the soccer culture and how sometimes it gets a little bit violent when things don't go well, especially in some other countries and things of that nature. Sometimes things get out of hand. and what creates that effect. And so just understanding how you have to create the right experience to get the right outcomes. And if you don't want violence to happen, sporting events or anywhere else, or things of that nature that create risk, you have to really manage the experience, understand the nature of the fans, and create the conditions to bring it all together. So that skill set became transferable for me, and I began to apply that to HR. So that's kind of how I backed into that. And I worked in the insurance industry, provider services, navigating claims and contracts and things of that nature. So that pushed me into that lane. And that was when I couldn't find a job from sport and entertainment. I took one in insurance and learned quite a bit.
Well, it now starts to make sense, even some of the language that you've used, because you started off earlier talking about risk, and those who get into insurance and such tend to understand risk. That it's not just about. I think the average person would look at insurance and say, well, they're the people who kind of uh, they take my money once a month to do what again? Because they don't recognize it is the management, it's the professional management of risk. It is to help you as the customer or the client not to get injured, not for your house not to burn down, for you not to wreck your car. But ultimately, it is about the management of risk. Life is a risk management exercise, and some are more successful than others. So, and the other thing I heard you say that I think is really important is this conversation about the experience. As a matter of fact, I have, and you've probably heard of them as well. Chief experience officers are something that I've heard of recently, where it's about the experience of both the internal and external customer with respect to the organization, to the business. A lot of times business does this, and I use the term organization for a reason, because this is not just for-profit businesses. This is also for nonprofits, it's for local governments, it's for any social setting where there are human beings. The experience is actually pretty important. It's pretty important. And so it also, again, to be quite honest, I didn't sit out a private investigator or anything, so I certainly wouldn't have known all this, but it sounds like that you've plied your craft, so to speak, in more than one industry. So talk about some of the different kinds of opportunities that you've had to practice this love for human resource management.
Sure. So my first internship when I was in college was actually at a comedy club. And I was working the front office, handling the money, dealing with the any type of guest issues or concerns, or it was more of a hospitality function, right? And so from that lens, I was able to start to see, some of the real world interactions, and some even people getting heckled to a degree and how they might respond. And that's some risk in that situation too, because if you pick it on the wrong person, they might come to the stage and see you. And so things of that nature would come up. And then I worked for, the University of South Carolina in the athletic department, just helping with the game day management of the football team, the soccer team, basketball team, and just, men's and women's sports, baseball as well. And so a whole different type of experience. It was really about creating the conditions. So my day would start about 6 or 7 a.m. We'd set up fan village, all these different experiences, carry it all the way through the game. And then I'd be done maybe 8, 9, 10 o'clock, maybe 11 or 12, depending on what time the game comes on. So that was a big shock, but I enjoyed it. So even though those days were very long, they were very much appreciated. And so that was that part. Then after that, I worked for background screening agency, right? One of the biggest background screening agencies in the nation. So again, we talk about risk and background checks and making sure that employers are getting the candidates and they understand the different factors that go on with them. And so that was more of creating the technology and supporting those individuals from a human resource perspective. And so I did that for about 4.5 years. And then I made my way to my current employer, and I got into manufacturing. And so that was my first stint in manufacturing. So again, safety, risk management, PPE, understanding all those different things. And so I worked from that role, and I ended up working in HR compliance, risk management. So again, you start to see how this goes. Then I became an HR director and I started working in the automation group and with corporate quality and with, again, still hard surface manufacturing there. And so I did that for several years before I moved into my current role, which is where I do organizational development, success, associate experience, and training strategy. And so that's kind of my trajectory and the positions I've held. But it's been a really good experience for me.
It's and I asked that question for a reason because I do think that human a focus on humans translates across every single industry that actually has humans. I think there's probably a few out there that have fewer humans. I mean, when everything's automated, I think there are fewer, but there are humans involved, and so this ability to be able to translate that experience from one to the next, and again, also take the lessons learned in one industry and take it to the next one, I think is really important. I'm hopeful as a society we're getting better about not siloing human beings in particular things because that's the last thing that they did. We do. I mean, a lot of the culture and process is set up such that we go and look for people who have experience in this particular thing. And then we want another person who has experience in this particular thing. And I think we're finding that, I'm a pro sport. I got to be honest, I'm a pro football fan more than anything else. But there are a lot of sports franchises who are starting to figure out that maybe we need to get that person who hasn't done this before to go where we want to go, not necessarily always the person who has. Because if you do what you did, you'll get what you got, and if you like that, keep doing it. But if you don't, it may be necessary to do things slightly differently, and that may mean different people. Or at the very least, it'll mean people who are adaptable. Again, folks like yourself who are adaptable from one organization, one industry to the next. And I think that's really important for folks who are in the human resource role, because when you're looking, and I want to put, hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth, but when you look at candidates and such, because you've had a varied background, you can see their varied background and what they may bring to the table.
Yeah. When you put the human being at the center of your focus, this work is anywhere. Like I could be in the grocery store caring for somebody's human condition and actually improve their experience as a customer, And so when you bring people into a workforce that understands that sort of thinking and they put the human being at the center, you get amazing results, and those skills transfer anywhere. So I think it goes back to also emotional intelligence and developing that as a skill set, right? Because it's not just about risk management, it's also about emotional management. Because when something is dangerous or somebody doesn't understand something and there's disagreement or conflict, that's when our emotional intelligence has to kick in. And if that's something we haven't worked to develop, that can be a challenge to navigate any type of situation with human beings.
Right. Absolutely. And wow, you mentioned earlier on the fact that you'd spent some time thinking about psychological safety. And again, this is I got to be honest, this is how I started to notice. I go like, this guy seems to get this psychological safety thing in a little bit deeper way than I, it's fashionable now to talk about it, to be quite honest. It is. It's fashionable. Folks are tossing the memes and the things out there. Oh, we got to get psychological safety, and psychological safety is a solution to everything. Well, it certainly can help everything, but it isn't necessarily the solution. It is a part of the solution. And again, I just noticed that you seem to have this awareness. So how does an HR person, somebody who's into HR, how do they get interested in psychological safety? Where does that connection come from?
I mean, for me personally, it came out of the pandemic situation, and that elevated it. So for me, it started with how can I help, frontline managers navigate, because, we were in a critical industry. And so certain people that were in offices maybe got to go away or work remote for a bit. But when you're in a critical industry, you're making products that are necessary to keep the economy going, that created a different level of tension, right? And so I began to create content and work in collaboration with amazing coworkers to start developing. Okay, let's start with trust. How do we build trust? How do we communicate in a better way? Because I started to understand what it meant to be trauma informed, and I also started to understand we were all in the midst of what I call, not just me. This is somebody else created this, but it's community based trauma, right? Where something is such a significant and profound effect on a group of people that everybody is facing some level of trauma, which means we're all triggered too. And so navigating that landscape, trying to equip leaders to prepare, because I said we're leading in unprecedented times because of our circumstances in this situation. So it started really with that. And since I got into it, I have not stopped exploring and searching. And I'll tell you, I don't anywhere near have all the answers, nor will I proclaim that I do. But what I will tell you is I'm continuing to learn. I'm challenging my own assumptions and biases about what I might think psychological safety is, and learning even more about it. So, you and Jason, and some other people I've seen, because Jason was the first person to really challenge my understanding of psychological safety. So I engaged with him digitally because he was probably a little frustrated with seeing it, because if you don't have a measurement system and you're just kind of talking about it, it seems more performative, it's inauthentic, and it actually does more harm than good. I've seen a lot of, articles and content about genuine versus fake psychological safety. And I would say there's no such thing as fake psychological safety. It either exist and you're working to improve it, or it's just not there. And that's a void, it's a gap, it's an opportunity. So
it's interesting you would bring that up. It's interesting how how seemingly small words and phrases can become discussions in and of themselves. And this discussion about whether or not the psychological safety is real or fake. I also read an article a while back that suggested you can have reverse bullying. And in both those cases, it either is or it isn't. To your point, either it is psychologically safe, and again, psychologically safe for whom? Because you can have psychological safety for one person or one group and not have it for everyone. And that has sometimes, it's not about intent either. It's not that it was intended to be psychologically unsafety for a particular group. It is that their safety, their concerns, their experience was simply not considered. It just wasn't considered. And the question or the your intent comes up when I actually let you know that you missed something. So, and here's the example that I would use is much of what drives the United States of America was developed for and by those who gender identify as male. It it is. Most of our work rules, most of our policies and practices in the workplace were developed for and by men. And even those of us who consider ourselves, so I consider myself not only an ally of women, uh, I consider myself to be an accomplice. I'm willing to get in there and and help where I can and actually put myself at risk, metaphorically speaking. But then that can come across as being patriarchal and that type of thing. So it is important that we both be involved. So if I am trying to create psychological safety for someone else, they have to be involved in the conversation. I know what works for me, but I have no idea what works for you, and I shouldn't make assumptions about what works for you, regardless that just because you are male or female or you're whatever. I can't make assumptions. It's important that we have communication with each other about what works for you and what works for me. Just because we are because we are we come from the African diaspora doesn't mean that we see the world identically. And again, that's why I think those conversations are so important. We judge ourselves on our intent. We judge other people based on what they do because we don't know what their intent is. And so to suggest that it's fake suggests it's some kind of intent to, to fool someone. And often it's not. It's just that folks have the information that they have and they're doing the best they can with what they have to work with.
That's why it's so important to have a measure of assessment and it's not the same thing as a survey. Like a survey has one purpose, and a survey might help drive your psychosocial risk assessment, right? But it's not your psychosocial risk assessment. It's not the same thing. You can have a survey strategy to try to understand engagement, experience, things of that nature, but it's not the same thing. It's not as involved as this psychosocial hazard and risk assessment, right? So
absolutely,
that's the critical piece that I wrestle with is how to navigate that part. And with me being one that focuses on change management as part of my strategy, communication, asking the tough questions, making sure we create clarity. Like if you look on my board behind me, I have VUCA and I have VUCA. And VUCA has two different meanings. It could either be volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. How do you address that? You address it with vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. So it's all about how you frame the situation. And so, I learned that from my leader. She passed it on to me. And I just think it's important to spread that awareness because it really shows us how we frame things can lead us to the outcomes that we really need. But if we're stuck in a performative state, we're trying to use the language, but we fail to model the behavior, then you're not having the impact that you really desire. I believe that the human intention is normally good, but being unwilling to do the necessary assessment and follow up to determine your actual impact, it derails everything that you were intending to do.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy, www.45003.com. Now back to this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And again, as we were, we're both saying, you can go into a circumstance or a situation with the best of intent, but it's important to evaluate the environment and the environment as it changes. Am I getting what I thought I was going to get, what I intended to get? And when we're dealing with other human beings, just because you intended me to feel a particular way doesn't mean I actually do. And again, it may have nothing to do with you. It may have to do with, so the example that I have used is that when companies tell me they've been around for 125 or 150 years, that rings differently for me than it might ring for other people. Because 150 years ago, if I do the math, we were just barely past the Emancipation Proclamation, and times weren't really all that great for people who look like me. So 150 years, that really doesn't motivate me. What are you doing now? I'm okay with that. But let's not have a conversation about 150 years ago when it was legal for you to not serve me at all.
Right.
And I also find that even though people have changed, systems that were built back in the 1890s, 1920s, 1940s, 1970s, if the system was built then and you're simply doing the same thing, that system wasn't set up to serve my needs and interest. It wasn't. You can be the greatest person in the world, but that system wasn't set up that way. So you're either going to have to change the system significantly or change me, and you might want to work on the system.
Yeah, absolutely. So as an individual that works with systems quite a bit, I came into that understanding pretty early on, and it was a little bit shocking to me, but I said it really shouldn't be, because you have to understand how systems are created and where power comes from, essentially. And so when you look at it, it's important that you don't dive strictly into the system and don't have any independent thought. Like, so if I were to come into the space that I'm in and I fail to do my research and bring into my experiences into the fold, then I am doing my role, my organization, and myself a disservice by not bringing my diversity into play to help elevate the systems or maybe even change them. Let's get rid of what doesn't work or what is restrictive or oppressive, and let's create systems that are for everybody, that allow everybody to receive development opportunities, training, fair assessments, things of that nature. And that's where HR really comes to the table and can make a significant impact, because that's what we do. That's what we should do, right?
Right. So talk to me a little bit about how a psychologically healthy and safe environment can contribute to both individual and individual success. Let's how does that help the individual if it's psychologically healthy and safe?
Yeah, so I took some notes earlier this year. We actually had Coach Prime did a session at one of our events, and he talked a little bit about this. And I remember taking the notes. And so you want to create a system where individuals can thrive. So you want to bring in the best talent, but you have to connect that individual success to the collective goals and targets. So if I bring in an individual superstar, but their specialization doesn't connect to the collective goals that we're trying to accomplish, then that individual will be frustrated because they're in the wrong seat, in the wrong place. They don't understand their impact or the value they're bringing. And it's not the type of value they really need to be bringing because their skill set doesn't necessarily match. They are very talented, but maybe not in the right seat. So making sure people are in the right seat, making sure they have a personalized plan, and making sure it's connected to the overarching business goals. And so they see how they connect to the collective success. It creates a feeling of stability. It creates more psychological safety. They understand their level of challenge, and there's requisite support so that they can meet their individual goals and collaborate to meet the overarching collective goals.
Hmm. Very interesting. So talk a little bit about how that environment really helps the organization as well. Specifically, what is it, if it's good for the person, how is it also good for the organization?
Sure. So, psychological safety is a group, team, or organizational construct. If you're talking more about the one-to-one interactions, you're talking more about building trust and building rapport. All of it's connected. But when you have an understanding of the conditions and you're addressing those conditions, then people start to understand what will happen when they show up. They don't have to hide. They don't have to wear masks. They understand what's expected of them, and they can be the best version of themselves. And that allows, when that all comes together, then you get a high performance organization, right? Because everybody is playing their part. And I'll use my sports analogy. If everybody on the team knows their role, they understand it, and they're talented, then that team has a good chance of winning their respective championship.
Right. Yeah, I find it interesting to see organizations use sports analogies, but not use some of the sports kind of, you know, the tenets that actually go along, because sport is one of the few things that is as much a meritocracy as anything. Either you can play that position or you cannot. And there are some industries, some businesses where you get credit for just hanging out for a while. If you're around for a while, and particularly if you hang out and you're related, you'll get the promotion, you'll get the opportunity, or if you're like the group, whatever the group is, you'll get the opportunity, regardless to how talented you may be. And in sport, it doesn't matter. At some point, everyone's physical skill is going to diminish a bit, and somebody else is going to be playing that position at some point. Uh, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Kareem, you name them. At a certain point, their physical skills got to the point to where younger players could actually play better than them. And not like, again, like some business. Oh, this person's been here for 35 years. We haven't given them any more training, any more anything, but they just should be here just kind of because. And conversely, there are scenarios where, well, they're too new. They can't possibly know what to do. So I find that's kind of interesting. The difference between what goes on in the sporting world. Now, again, it's not perfect. It has its challenges as well, but how it is really focused around, having people in the right positions to play the role that they're supposed to play so the team can win.
Yeah. And so for me, that's why I'm not in the sports industry, right? Because I recognize there's a much greater opportunity to help people along their journey outside of that arena, because of some of the lack of stability I talked about on the front end. So that's a great place to work, really exciting and fun. But I did some research recently, and this was an article with HR Dive. And what I saw was individuals 50 and over, there's 2.4 million that may be leaving the workforce very soon because of some of the changes that are predicted around technology, technological advances, things of that nature. And the biggest concern is upskilling, training, things of that nature. So simply by increasing the quality of our communication, having a training plan, helping people understand the expectation, being clear on the expectation, you could salvage a large chunk of that workforce that has been dedicating their lives. They have the requisite skills, but they just need to understand, how do I upskill? How do I make the change? And that's where the system comes back into play, because it needs to, again, be for all. And if it's for all, those individuals that are willing to get the training, go after the training, if the training is made available to them, can properly elevate and continue to work as long as they desire to, as opposed to feeling like they're being pushed out of the workforce. So I would use that as a relatively recent example, that could be looked at to say, hey, we have to prepare people for change. We have to keep the human being in mind, and we have to take into consideration the fears or the concerns that might affect different people. And depending on their experiences or their backgrounds, it could be different factors that come into play.
Yeah, I heard actually during the pandemic, I heard I think it was a webinar, and it involved, I think, 2 or 3, maybe 4 of the Fed chairs. One of them was, at the time, I believe he was the only Black Fed chair at the time, and he suggested that our economy had lost out on a few $1 trillion in activity because of discrimination and lack of equity, and attempting to keep things the same. It's as if we look at everything as a zero sum game, and I don't believe that our economy has to be zero sum. I know it can be as big and as diverse as the number of people on the planet if we chose to do it that way. If we, instead of looked at everything as primarily a financial discussion, and thought bigger to say, look, we're going to make more if we can keep the intellectual capital that this person brought to this organization, and the real family. So it really feels like family. People feel like they're being supported and cared for. And, we're concerned about them as human beings. We'll do better as an organization if we're able to modify the system to continue to produce great outcomes, but do it differently as the world changes and as the people or the humans in this organization change. And it is worth the investment of time in these humans. It is. It's worth the time, because the return that you're going to get, sometimes you couldn't even pay for. You couldn't pay for. Wow. So, what role, if you were speaking to a room full of human resource professionals, what role do you think HR professionals should play in addressing psychological health and safety in the workplace?
I mean, I think the first thing is really to elevate their understanding, to ask questions, to search and to seek. That's been what I have done. And then I think the other part is to look at your partnerships. I partner when I was in the plants, I partnered very closely to our safety manager. You know, in corporate entities, I'm connected with risk management. I have regular conversations, and I just make sure that I'm not running in a lane and not bringing other people along with me. It takes a collective. Like me as an individual, I can't move the needle for psychological health and safety. But with more understanding, with the right systems, with the right level of collaboration, then we can get to work. But I think HR could be the spark because we cross over so many different things. We have exposure and understanding of so many different situations. In many cases, we have the pulse of the organization alongside safety because safety will see things as well and they'll understand things at different levels. So I think that partnership between HR and safety or HR and risk management is really critical.
Right, right. Yeah, again back to I mentioned the pursuing the degree. I pursued HR as a graduate degree because I didn't really want to do math. I didn't want to be an engineer. I can do it, but I don't like it. I mean, it's not the side of my brain I enjoy. And I found that many organizations I'd come across, the safety function was in HR, really. So, and so I've never been a practitioner. I'm certainly supportive of what good HR people do and critical of some folks who are in HR who probably shouldn't be there because they don't appear to like people. Yeah, I've come across a few HR people. They don't appear to like other human beings themselves. At least that's how they come across because and to be honest, um, many of them. I have a good friend who suggests that in the 90th percentile of HR professionals are simply burned out. They're burned out. They have a lot on their plate and virtually no resource to get it done. And people are constantly running to them looking for solutions. And sometimes they can help and sometimes they can't. So again, that to your point, there's a real strong connection, at least for me, between the safety folks and the HR folks. I think they are the two keys, honestly, to creating psychological health and safety. I really do. Because if you were to look at a significant portion of the psychosocial hazards, they are best addressed through HR related mitigations, policies, training, selection processes, accurate job descriptions and evaluations and all these kinds of things. The lack of these kinds of processes are what actually create some of the psychosocial hazards that impact people. I got hired for a job. Nobody really told me. I didn't really get a great orientation. So I applied. I showed up and they put me to work today. And I didn't really get an orientation to what this thing was about. And I started to understand what it's about. And it doesn't really work for me. So now what do I do? And sadly, what some organizations do, you advertised the job, you opened it up, you took this person in, you didn't really tell them what the job really was. And again, when they are negatively affected by one of the psychosocial hazards you expose them to, then you make it their fault and start looking for a new person to bring in to burn out and to kind of, to ultimately harm. And that's really unfortunate and it's really unfair. And it's not good for either the individual or the person. It's about when we bring you into this organization, we made a commitment and so do you. And as long as we're both willing to work on that commitment, we should be looking for ways to develop you and ways to, fit work around people as opposed to people around work all the time.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, as we start to wrap it up, if you can wave the magic wand and make one change in an organization, just a generic organization that would make it more psychologically healthy and safe, what would that be?
So I get to wave a magic wand and make anything happen that I want to see happen.
Right?
Giving me the leeway for that. So
Yes.
I think it really goes back to the strength of the system and the support of the system, right? And I would create an ecosystem that would have all the requisite touch points to make sure that it's operationalized, that it's a part of what we live and breathe and do every single day, and that we have the requisite buy-in. That's part of our identity, cultural identity. As an organization, that would be what I would do. I think if you have the right systems in place that connect to that psychosocial factor and that environmental factor, then you're in a good spot. So my focus would be on, and it is today, is on creating the right systems to operationalize that. And you're still going to have challenges, but as long as you have the right system, you'll catch it and you'll be able to address it. You'll be able to improve it. So I think that's the major key. It's not something you can talk about loosely. It's not something that you can pay attention to and then take your eye off the ball, so to speak. You have to stay on top of it. And the system is the way you do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I said that was probably going to be last, but something comes to mind again before we go. One of the underlying tenets of this podcast is to encourage us as a country to have stronger regulation around psychological health and safety, something more than what we have, because at the moment we're kind of lacking in that area. What are your thoughts? Are there? Do you think we actually need, a law or standards, or again, this may be in the magic wand area again, but do you think we could use some more assistance that way, or are there other ways that we could get to a more psychologically healthy and safe work culture across the country?
Standards and legislation, regulations help accelerate the impact, right? There already is a standard, right? Came out in 2021 as a kind of addition on the 45,001 ISO standard, 45,003, right? There's a current bill that's being reviewed in, I think, Massachusetts, H 1882, which is the Workplace Psychological Health and Safety Act, I think is what that is, right? So I know what's in motion. I'm of the mindset, and I want others to be of the mindset, do not wait for what you know is right to do. And when it comes, because it's going to come, it's only a matter of time, in my opinion. But in my mind right now, I'm trying to go ahead and use the guidance that exists, partner with individuals like yourself and others to really understand and deepen just understanding of others that I have influence with. I think that's the major key. But to answer your question, I do think legislation is coming. Whether or not I want it to or not, I think it is, right? And so I've dealt with that as the reality. But more importantly, I don't want to have to be legislated on what is right to do. But I understand also everybody is not wired like me. And so if we want to make the world a better place, that's where legislation comes into play. So I understand the need for it, but I want to make sure whatever it is or whatever it looks like, we're already on track and we have things in place. And that's the way I operate.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Brandon, this has been this is just wonderful chance to meet you and hear a little bit more about the work that you're doing, and it's inspiring. It's good to know. As I also mentioned, when I started this thing, I thought there were some days I went like, "Is there anybody in the U.S. who gets this?" And thankfully, I'm finding that I'm not alone. I'm not alone. That there are others, and there are others across industries. Not just safety people, not just HR people, but there are mental health providers, and there's attorneys, and there's all kinds of folks in general leadership and operational roles who get the importance of creating this kind of environment. And so good times are ahead. Good times are ahead. So again, thanks very much for sharing your experience, your expertise with us over these past few moments. And if you're watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like, subscribe, and share. If you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you've heard will bring you back in the future. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found at psychealthandsafetyusa.com. And please do become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by reaching out to us on LinkedIn. We're certainly excited to have Brandon here this week, and we are going to have another guest next week because every week is a great week in psych health and safety. And we're looking forward to more conversations on this topic. So until next time, we'll see you and hear you and be with you again on the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much. Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.